on this. It's a good place to start. We'll start with the tariffs, Robert. The tariffs, which might be the black swan event in Canadian politics that might have not overthrown, but thrown in the air the election as it was supposed to occur. Horse crap, because I still think what I think about how that could have been handled in Canada. Set that aside. Tariffs across the board. I don't think I need to show the table, but I will if we can find it. Every country on earth, including an island that is uninhabited up in the north, and the joke is that he's applying a tariff on penguins. I really wanted to fact check Adam Schiff. They all put out that stupid meme. He's putting tariffs on penguins. I'm not even joking. And when George explained, it's like, yeah, it's an uninhabited island, which could serve as the place for incorporation, so they could then circumvent tariffs. So, be idiots about it, but Adam Schiff is. Tariffs across the board, across all countries, except Russia. Now, I had to go fact check that one myself. Everyone's like, every country's on that list except for Russia. I was like, dude, A, Russia already has crippling sanctions. B, Russia already has tariffs on aluminum derivatives, metals. They've already got tariffs. So the fact that they're not on the list is only because they've already been tariffed up the wazoo as retaliation for the war in Ukraine for the last couple of years. So idiots don't repeat that same talking point. You'll be stupid. Robert, what is your take on it in terms of applying across the board tariffs, even on countries with which America has a trade surplus, such as Australia?
Yeah. So first we'll look at it from a constitutional perspective. So the Constitution gives Congress the power to raise revenue and lay taxes. A tariff is, from that constitutional perspective, can be considered a tax. It's not always crystal clear that it is to be completely forthcoming. There's a lot of assumptions that it is. The reason why it might not be is it depends on who pays it. If you're entirely, for example, are sanctions taxes? I haven't heard any liberals making that argument, right? So what are sanctions? Sanctions are imposing a burden on foreign governments' ability to do economic activity in the United States. So on the first fundamental assumption that a tariff is a tax is in fact a legally questionable assumption. But even if we assume it to be so, the Congress has explicitly delegated the rate of tariffs decision, both who is tariffed and how much they're tariffed, to the President of the United States in a range of laws that date back to the 1920s. It is a well-established legal precedent. Indeed, the Supreme Court in 1928 adjudicated this precise question because somebody sued, say a manufacturer sued, saying, hey, the president is imposing a tariff on my inputted goods. This is a tax that Congress hasn't specifically authorized, hence it's unconstitutional. Supreme Court said, you're wrong. Said, even assuming a tariff is a tax, which they acknowledged is a legally disputed issue, even if it is, Congress delegated that task, the rate and who pays it, to the president, and that is within their constitutional authority and makes sense because tariffs are unique in impacting national security and foreign affairs, where the president has almost carte blanche under the Constitution of the United States. So legally and constitutionally, if you're seeing these articles saying this is absolutely can't be legal, they're wrong. And there's Supreme Court adjudication on the topic, just going back to 1928. And it's been undisputed and uninterrupted for presidents to unilaterally impose tariffs without congressional approval or authorization for more than a century in America. Literally every president at some point has done it. Have they done it at the scale President Trump is doing? Not in more than a century. However, the scale is irrelevant and inconsequential to the legality of the action in the first place. And you have an established political precedent where FDR unilaterally imposed tariffs on nations. Truman unilaterally imposed tariffs on nations. Eisenhower unilaterally imposed tariffs on nations. John Kennedy unilaterally imposed tariffs on nations. LBJ unilaterally imposed tariffs on nations. Richard Nixon unilaterally imposed tariffs on nations. Jimmy Carter unilaterally imposed tariffs on nations. So did Ronald Reagan. A lot of the libertarian right kind of forgets Reagan's policy on that. He had multiple levels of policy, including waging foreign economic war against the entire Soviet Union and communist world, for which he spent a lot of resources, and in which, guess what? Tariffs were a critical tool. Guess what else he used tariffs for? He used it to protect the steel and motorcycle industry in the United States and the automobile industry in the United States. People forget that part of Ronald Reagan. Even Poppy Bush imposed tariffs unilaterally. George W. even imposed tariffs unilaterally. Bill Clinton even imposed tariffs unilaterally. Barack Obama imposed tariffs unilaterally, and so did Joe Biden. So this, oh my goodness, this can't possibly be legal, are people who have complete historical amnesia and are as illiterate legally and constitutionally as they are economically. Now, speaking to the policy side of the equation, I recommend a couple of reviews. Thank credit to Tucker Carlson, who both did interview with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, but also Robert Leitzinger, the U.S. Trade Representative. Both of these men are extraordinarily and exceptionally well equipped to explain to you macroeconomic and tariff role in it. And his interviews with both of them are very enlightening, especially to me, because I did not know both of them had the degree of sympathy and sensitivity and empathy for working class Americans that both of them demonstrated. One, in Leitzinger's case, because he grew up in Ashtabula, Ohio, a manufacturing town that got ripped apart by these bad trade policies. And Bessent, because he was an upwardly mobile person who became downwardly mobile early in his life, so he saw economic stress to his family, and he grew up sympathetic to people who have to go through that. And both of the Donald Trump cares about working class America, not Wall Street. It's amazing how Democratic messaging switched within a week. It went from Trump is promoting the oligarchs. Then all of a sudden, all the oligarchs get their rears whipped on Wall Street with Trump's tariff policy, and it's, oh, Trump's anti-Wall Street. Now that's bad for the Democratic Party? If you want other explanations, read the interview with Orrin Cass that was done with that British populist character. What is the Lotus Eaters? What was that podcast of the Lotus? What was that Carl Benjamin one, Viva? What's the name of that again?
I have to think. I have to refresh.
The podcast of the Lotus Eaters.
Lotus Eaters.
Okay, Lotus Eaters. There was a guy on there who did a great presentation. He explained that the fake economy is the economy Trump is trying to take apart to restore the real economy when you make real things. So let's deal with a couple of myths that are out there. Myth number one. Automatically what will happen with tariffs is the importer will shift the price to increase the price on all domestic goods that are imported in. Now, there's two components to that. If that in fact happens, it creates a market opportunity, a market advantage for American manufacturers and to restore American production and American industry and reshore our supply chain.
I'm going to stop you periodically because I'm going to have questions that are punctual. That's the argument. The retort to that is going to be, but the infrastructure is not there and it's years away. So imposing a tariff now is just in the short term going to jack up the prices until that infrastructure can be brought back and created.
That's the second problem. Here we have a century of history of evidence. We have contemporary evidence from countries all around the world. We don't really have to guess what happens with a tariff because we can see with our lived history and our current contemporary history, these nations, for example, guess who has some of the highest tariffs in the world? China. Guess who has some of the lowest prices of goods in the world? China. Oh, but they think that can happen. They're always going to pass it on. No, they're not. And to my libertarian friends, go back and redo your math. Your assumption is that the free market, creates price discovery. What does that mean? It means you are already charging the maximum price you can get, right? In other words, the idea that you can I'll just add it to the price as an importer. Really? Why aren't you already doing that? If that's a price bearable in the market, you're already charging it. Here's when you do study all of American history involving tariffs, world history involving tariffs, current economies involved in tariffs. You will find that, as Bessent pointed out in his interview with Tucker Carlson, more than 90% of the tariff is never added to the price. That's a lie and a myth that anybody that spent 5 seconds studying economic history, which I guess Peter Schiff can't do in between getting other things wrong, about crypto and whatnot, you would already know this. And this is what the whole world knows. Like, a lot of people woke up and they were shocked to discover the whole world uses tariffs. We're the only one who haven't been using it. We're the only unilateral disarmament. We're the guinea pig for the globalist. And Donald Trump has decided America's not going to be the guinea pig for globalists anymore. If you want a good breakdown on the geopolitical ramifications of tariff, watch the Duran. The point Alex and Alexander made right off the top is this is the end of globalism. This is the end of the EU. They understood politically the geopolitical fallout better than anybody doing any analysis out there. This is Trump saying America will no longer be the guinea pig of globalists because everybody else is charging tariffs. And that's the other problem. So if it's the case that charging tariffs is disastrous for your economy and leads to massive price hikes, why hasn't it ever done so? Why is it America was far more profitable and grew much faster under really high tariffs than it did under low tariffs? Why is it also true for China? Why is it also true historically for the United Kingdom in the late 18th century and early 19th century? Why is it but true for literally every single country that's ever utilized it? Read Kevin Phillips. He started arguing this in the mid-1970s. Wrote a book called Staying on Top, America's Need for an Industrial Policy. Here's what he predicted. He said, if you study economic history, if you study economic reality, then what you know is that tariffs eat into profits. Tariffs are not shiftable to price. And they're not shiftable to price because price discovery in a free market already maximizes that cost, right? You can't just jack it up more because what happens is you lose customers. You're no longer efficient. This is why 90% of the tariff, this is why all the countries are complaining. For example, if you're an exporter and all you have to do is add to the price, but just shift the tariff like it's a sales tax, then you wouldn't have a complaint. Yet they're all going berserk. Why? As Secretary Bessent made clear, it's because they are going to be paying that cost and they know it. It's where my libertarian friends get a lot of stuff wrong. They get this wrong in other regulatory and minimum wage contexts and other contexts. The idea that an employer can just constantly shift cost onto a customer is belied by their own theory. And this is true of my friend George Gammon. George, go back and look. Price discovery means you've already at the top price. Right? If I'm a business and I'm selling something, I'm going to sell it for as much as I can get for it. Right? I'm not going to Now, I do all kinds of discounts in my legal career because I do it to help people. But if I was just charging my max rate, then I would charge my max rate. The tariff or tax change wouldn't change that at all because I'm already getting the maximum value I can possibly get for the cost of that good. That's why if you study economies around the entire world now, or for the last 300 plus years, where this has been any part of a policy, you'll discover very little correlation between tariffs and prices. The impact is on the foreign nation and the foreign competitor. What it does is, here's the main way it helps American manufacturers. It makes it more difficult for foreigners to compete over time. That's what it does. Now, will it take time to re-onshore and get domestic manufacturing back up and going? Absolutely. Some of those projects some projects can happen quickly, some will take years. But you need to institutionally incentivize that to occur anyway. Here's the second problem with all the critics. From all the Democratic critics, they're the biggest lying hypocrites on the planet. Bernie Sanders ran on this for 25 years. Barack Obama promised to do it, then just lied. Bill Clinton promised to fix it, then lied. Jimmy Carter promised to fix it and just failed to deliver. I don't think he.
And by the way, the argument, I got two questions, but the argument back then was that tariffs would be a way to protect the American worker from foreign exploitation.
And not only that, it's also like we have all these laws and rules. And this one to the left, it makes absolutely no sense to be arguing against tariffs. The left says an economy has to function with basic standards of human decency, for safety, for labor, for the environment, etc. Okay, fine. There are clearly economic costs to that regulatory burden. So for the employer, that doesn't necessarily translate into increased price of goods because, again, the prices are really set by the marketplace. You can only charge what you can get for it. If you can't get that much for it, you just can't get it. Now, whether or not you can make a profit on that is where it's all impacted, and whether you develop or anyway. But right now, the left has the most insane logic in the world. That they're saying the only way a free market can operate is if certain minimal standards of safety are met for environment, labor, and the rest. Unless you decide to go to a foreign country. Then you can ignore all the labor laws. Then you can violate all the safety laws you want, and we'll reward you for it with free access to our market and customers. That makes no sense at all. Either you believe in these environmental and labor standards, or you don't. Because if you do, they have to be universal. Like, oh, I've seen this nonsense. Americans don't want to work. That's garbage. Quit lying about the American worker. I don't care whether you're Vivek. Go back to India, Vivek, if you believe that kind of nonsense. We don't need you here. I don't need any of these people here that want to demean the American worker. We were the #1 manufacturing country in the world for the better part of a century. We put manufacturing on the planet. That's who America is. So these bunch of crying commies can go to whatever foreign country they want to go to and quit demeaning and defaming the American worker. So those United Autos workers were there with President Trump because they understand the importance of this. Because here's what we've been telling American manufacturers. If you're dumb enough to make your product in America, we will punish you and charge you double, triple, quadruple what is charged a foreign company that abuses its labor, that strips its environment, and that denies safety to its products. That is what has been insane from day one. All Trump is trying to do is have an even playing field, not one which screws the American worker.
And this goes back exactly to the opening rant about Mark Carney, which is, yeah, we believe in the environment here, but not in the other countries where we then offshore our pollution. We don't want to look for lithium up in the region of Quebec with good labor standards, good technology to make it clean. We want to go get our lithium and rare earth minerals from China, South Africa, other African countries where it wreaks havoc on the environment, but at least it's not here. So we've outsourced the pollution and crippled ourselves economically in the meantime. But to go back to one thing earlier, it's been bothering me. You say China imposes tariffs on imported products, which I understand. Some people are going to say that, well, they already have the infrastructure to make it cheap internally, in which case the question I'm asking is if they already have the infrastructure, then why would they impose a tariff, which would presuppose that another country could produce it for equally as cheap and then import it?
Agreed. And this goes back to my third point. The reason why I became a strong advocate of using tariffs is thanks to this man, Kevin Phillips. Started reading him when I was a kid. I read him because he was one of the best political prognosticators in the entire world. If you wanted people used to order his American Political Report, a weekly newsletter, because of how good it was at predicting. People who didn't agree with him ideologically on anything just read him because he was so good at predicting. And to me, one way you can measure accuracy, I made this in the argument with Scott Adams. Scott Adams didn't quite understand the second level impact of my statements because I was pointing out to Scott that his own methods of measuring the accuracy of an opinion was rebutting his own early opinions on COVID. That was, we should all be scared and hide in our basement kind of thing. But where I agree with Adams is that one of the ways you measure the quality of an analysis, that's why I love sports betting, at Sports Picks. That's why we got that up and going. Got screwed on the fun, got totally unlucky in the Final Four, but hopefully we get lucky. Hopefully luck is a little bit more of a lady, like Frank Sinatra asked her to be this Monday night in the national championship game. We'll see. But his accuracy was off the charts. From the 1970s, he said, look, here's what's going to happen. If you study the real economy, not the fake economy that economists study. By the way, if you go back and study economists in the late 19th century, they all agreed with tariffs. They suddenly changed when the people writing their checks changed. Here's what Phillips pointed out. A country uses protective tariffs and tariff policy in an intelligent way to build up their domestic industry. That creates excess capital in an investor class. The investor class then decides, we could make a lot more money if we weren't making this here anymore, if we didn't have to share the benefits of this with our own people. And so they decide to look for markets to go elsewhere. But the key to that is changing tariff policy so that new country has high tariffs and your country now suddenly has low tariffs. And that what happens is that country then replaces you industrially. And Kevin Phillips said this is what the UK screwed up in doing. The UK used protective tariffs to build up its economy. Then it radically reduced its tariffs because its British investor class wanted to invest in America because hey, we can get it cheaper. And so they all invest in America. Guess what? Within a few decades, America replaced Great Britain as the great manufacturer of the world. Mm-hmm. What Phillips predicted beginning in the 70s, he said Germany, Japan, and Asia, Europe and Asia are going to follow an industrial policy. And what they're going to do is they're going to repeat what happened to the UK and what happened to the US. And then what will happen for the US and now what happened to the US. And he said, what will happen is Germany and Japan will gain a competitive edge because they will supplement and subsidize their domestic production. And because we're reducing tariffs while they're raising them, the net effect will be their industrial base will expand, our industrial base will shrink, their working class will prosper, our working class will be impoverished, and it will have knock-on effects for national security when you don't make your own goods, as well as being economically unreliable and undependable to shift to a consumer-based economy. And guess what? By the 1980s, that was clear for everybody to see. One of the readers of Kevin Phillips was a young real estate construction magnate in the city of New York named Donald John Trump. This is why Donald Trump started talking about this issue in the 1980s. See him on Oprah. See him on whatever his name was, the predecessor to Dr. Phil, the other guy. Other people. He went to the NAFTA and said, no. This is going to be a disaster. And then we made the monstrous mistake between NAFTA and WTO and then letting China into the WTO at most favored nation status. And Phillips said in books like Boiling Point, this is going to be a total disaster. America's manufacturing is going to be hollowed out. Our working class is going to be crushed. Our supply chains will no longer be secure for essential goods. We can be held hostage or blackmailed or extorted at any time by people who are our public adversaries in other nations. And those nations will prosper. Those nations will profit. Those nations will get rich. How has China had a radical improvement in its economy over the last quarter century? Guess what they used, by the way? High tariffs. How is that? I thought high tariffs destroy the economy. High tariffs are going to be really bad. Not for anybody who's ever done them in the entire history of the world. And Phillips was right. And guess what? Bill Clinton wrong. George W. Bush wrong. All the economists wrong. They should be put up and hung for some of their insane propositions. They all said NAFTA was going to lead to a boom in American production. Wrong. They said inviting China in is going to lead to a boom of American prosperity. Wrong. They've been wrong on all. They said doing lower tariffs would help America compete with Germany and Japan. Wrong. All they've been is wrong, and wrong. As the great movie Back to School, Rodney Dangerfield, here's your definition of most economists. They're that professor who's getting up with his fan, who says we're going to make widgets and so forth. And Rodney Dangerfield, a real businessman like Donald Trump, said that doesn't make any sense in the real world. And the economics professor he goes, well, we're here with the academy. We're not going to listen to that. Your rogue behavior. And so later the economics professor says, where should we put our factory? And Rodney Dangerfield said, Disneyland, because that's where all the other fantasies are, because that's what they live in. In the real world, anybody who actually is literate in economics, in economic history, understands Phillips was right, and all the corporatists, all the globalists have been wrong. And Donald Trump is done with it, and so are the American people.
Well, and Gammon presented a good both sides of it, and he presented the argument. Well, look, if you
and George's a great guy, I love George.
Oh yeah, no, but he said
he's more of a libertarian than I am on some of these topics.
Well, no, and one of the arguments that he raised was, well, if you pull this out of China and you bring it back to ethical labor environments, those kids that are working and making $2 a day, well, they'll go into child prostitution and whatever in these third world developing countries. And the chat was saying, well, whether or not that's true, it's not our problem. Like it's not our problem to cripple ourselves financially to prevent the exploitation of children and adults in foreign countries.
And explained by Leitzinger, explained by Besant, explained by Cass, explained by a range of others, explained historically by Kevin Phillips. The reason we went into a low tariff environment after World War II was not to prosper economically. This was admitted by everybody at the time. Everybody in the policy decision-making role said America's going to suffer economically by making ourselves the global consumers and to stabilize dollar access globally and to boost everybody else. Because the theory was this: if we make Germany and Japan prosperous, they won't go back to wanting to wage war on everybody. That was premise number one. Mm-hmm. That's why we gave them an industrial policy while we had none. We let them subsidize their businesses, support their businesses, shore up their businesses, have high domestic tariffs, and we did low tariffs ourselves and only imposed cost on our businesses, not support for our businesses. Exactly the opposite. Like some people are confused by the model. Trump's model was based on the trade deficit principally, but not exclusively. What it is often it's not the direct tariff, right? There may not be a specific 10% tax on the border. What there is instead is a value-added tax that's imposed domestically, another tax that's imposed, other regulations that are imposed, bogus safety standards. The French are masterful at this. They come up with 100 excuses why they can't import your product. It just happens to compete with them. Yeah, just a coincidence, right? Everybody in the world does this. Like when you see people saying, well, who could handle tariffs like the EU had? Well, then why is the EU imposing tariffs? Why is the EU imposing support and subsidies for its internal domestic manufacturers? As has been well explained, The European Union was just German domination by other means. Now they're busy imploding because of their political insanity at the moment, but their own industrial economy. But that's a relatively new thing. Germany did the industrial policy; they profited. Japan did the industrial policy; they profited. America a century ago did the industrial policy; we profited. Britain did it a century before that; they profited. You could argue the Dutch did it 2 centuries before that; they profited. China did it to massive profits. When China was introduced in the most favored nation status into the WTO, the claim was that America would not lose its manufacturing edge, and there would just be competitive edges and distinctions. But as Leitzinger made clear, if there aren't nobody's rigging the rules, you shouldn't have systemic trade deficits. If you have systemic trade deficits, that is highly unlikely to be from economic competition. It is most likely to be from one side rigging the rules in their favor. But China went from being a non-player in the world of global production. That's what you see these idiots saying, America can't make these things. There was no evidence of China ever making these things. And in 20 years, they became the most dominant player in the world at making these things. And then you get to the two other last components, national security, and that there are things that matter more than the price of things. So let's take the last one first. The Oren Cass, Steve Bessent, Leitzinger, others have made this point. You cannot measure a public policy solely by the price of goods. Because tell me, ask anybody in the heart of the industrial Midwest that we now call the Rust Belt for a reason. Ask them, which would you rather have? A stable job, a stable family, a stable community, stable support of kids, stable support of your neighbors, low crime, low addiction rates, quality of high quality standard of life, accessible housing, accessible benefits to everyday life, or you can get a T-shirt for $2.25 instead of $10. Woohoo! Which do you think most American people would take? You cannot measure the whole. This is my problem with libertarians in general. You cannot reduce the world to price. It is not the only thing that matters in the real world. So a good policy takes into consideration the impact on crime, considers the impact on public health, considers on life expectancy, on the quality of life. That a quality of life is not measured in whether I get this for $1.99 or 99 cents. And then last, but far from least, the reason why people like Bessent came on board. By the way, you can get this opinion from Warren Buffett. Go back and read what he wrote in 2003. Warren Buffett himself made this exact point about how you cannot have these systemic trade deficits and survive as an economy or society or country. You won't see the institutional media talking about that. You won't see Benji Shapiro talking about that. You won't see a lot of people talking about that because they live in their own denial and la-la land world. They in the same fake Disney-esque economics world of that economic professor from the movie Back to School. National security depends on Trump's tariff policy. What COVID exposed to the world and shocked some was that America does not have control over its own essential goods and services for its own military or providing for its own country. This includes essential goods for medicine, essential goods for technology, essential goods for military technology, essential goods in the food supply, you name it. What we discovered is because we had offshored our supply chain, China could, anytime they wanted, blackmail us into doing anything they wanted, extort us into doing anything they wanted. China understood what Kevin Phillips understood. If you're not making essential goods, you don't have an economy. And that's what Trump understands. And Trump realizes it is extremely dangerous to America's national security, to our safety, to be depending on foreign labor and foreign nations who are openly and overtly hostile to us, or at least ideologically exactly the opposite of us, to have them control our essential resources. That's how insane this last century of policy, half century of policy has been. So for social cohesion purposes, because public policy goes beyond the price of goods, that because for national security reasons and for good economic policy reasons, Trump is right, and the Constitution and Congress explicitly and expressly gave him that authority.
I had a question about the tariffs. Oh, my question was this. If everybody applies similar tariffs to reciprocal countries? It's going to be a stupid question because it depends on trade volumes. If everyone applies the same tariffs, is that not the same thing as nobody having any tariffs? And is the end goal of all of this to really have total free trade, no tariffs between any nations?
This is what Trump understands, that the Zero Hedge understands, Stephen Miller understands, some people understand, but many in the media and many of his critics do not. America is the biggest market in the world. So that's what's different. So yeah, Vietnam could reciprocate. China can reciprocate. China can say, we're going to put 100% tariff on your goods. That's fine. China has not taught its public market to consume. Instead, it says save, buy in housing, buy in this way. Put your money back in here, back in China. That's why China has strict capital controls, for example. In other words, all the things people say tariffs should do have never happened to China. Why? Because China is already not allowing foreign goods in any to compete with their domestic goods. So jacking up the tariffs make no difference because their goods can't get in at that price anyway. By contrast, China does depend on low tariffs in the U.S. And what happened is when Trump imposed relatively modest tariffs in his first term, China evaded him. You want to know why Vietnam's high on the agenda list?
Because China diverts all of its manufacturing to Vietnam, Cambodia, with respect to solar panels, textiles, and whatever.
That's exactly right. So it's the reason why Little Penguin Island is being hit. As George Gammon pointed out, you've got to make sure there's no loopholes that these nations can use to circumvent tariffs. China went aggressively into Mexico, aggressively into Canada. I mean, Canada, as you pointed out, if Carney wins the election, Canada just might as well call itself, they're not the 51st state of the United States, they're the 18th Republic of China. That's what they will be. This is why Trump is concerned about aspects of China. Mm-hmm. This is why he's concerned about aspects of Greenland and the Panama Canal. Despite, people can listen to Leisinger's end of his presentation with Tucker Carlson. He explains how China ain't our friend, and that we have to be conscious of this. That's what gives the U.S. the edge, right? Why did Colombia retreat within 4 hours of Trump threatening tariffs as a tool to simply get? And by the way, this is what illegal immigration is all about. As J.D. Vance pointed out to Joe Rogan, right? The labor we couldn't export through using low tariff policy, we imported with illegal immigration, right? Because you can't export your landscaping job. You can't export your service industry job. You can't export your construction industry job. So they imported the illegal immigrants to screw us even further. The American working class has been hammered again and again and again and again, punched in the face repeatedly, and said, oh, don't worry, you'll benefit from the cheaper prices at Walmart, which has not been a net benefit for them on the P&L sheet. So the key is the U.S. holds all the cards because the U.S. is the biggest customer in the world. We consume far more than we produce, and that's a bad equation. We need to change that equation. But what does that mean? It means if you're Colombia, very little competition comes in from U.S. goods for your manufacturing. You depend on exports much more than imports. Same is true in China. Same is true in look at a high tariff country, and you will find they depend more on exports than imports as it relates to the United States. And this is why Trump is like, we got all the cards, and it's time we start using them to help American workers, not just Wall Street and the globalists.